Welcome back to our show. Today, we are talking about the concept of cursing in general versus cursing at someone. This was a question that one of our students in one of our older groups asked. So we're talking about that discussion because once it happened, I felt like it was a really important, relevant conversation, especially for our older students. And then Ramiro sharing the things that have been going on over the last couple of weeks. We've had some bonus weeks in our schedule where we just do extra game time. That's the way our schedule works in the spring sometimes, is we have some bonus weeks. So just some stories and things that have come up in those 2 weeks of our bonus time. So here we go. So our first topic for this episode has to do with a question that a student asked. It was the same week that we had the lesson about asking for help. And so I'm not sure. I'm wondering if maybe we were talking about being hurt, because that was part of the conversation about asking for help, is, knowing what to do if you're hurt. I'm wondering if that's where it came from. But one of our older students asked if I think the way that he said it was, is it common or is it normal to curse when you're hurt? I think that's the way he was asking. And it brought up a really great thought in my mind about the difference between just cursing in general, cursing at a situation versus cursing at a person. So that's the conversation that we had with the kids, that it is actually normal to curse when somebody's hurt or upset or frustrated. It's not uncommon for that to happen. Again, a lot of the kids in this group are almost adults or are adults already. So it's a very age appropriate conversation. But how that's different from cursing at somebody. So we really made the distinction between those two things. How cursing due to a situation is just to yourself. It's just kind of like a conversation you're having with yourself. And you might use some choice language to describe things that are happening, to describe how you feel about things. You could even do that when there's nobody else around. It's just the way that you're talking about that situation. Versus cursing at somebody is when your language is directed to somebody who is hearing it. And so we talked about the difference between the two. And I really love when kids ask questions about things I have never even thought about before, because that was definitely one of them. I have never even thought about different types of cursing and how different those two scenarios are. So I think that was a great way to make sure that the kids understood the difference in those two concepts. And then he asked, is it normal for people to curse when they're, I think one of them was when they're hurt and one was when they're upset. I think those were, because I remember he asked it in two different ways. And I think that's the way that he asked it, when people are hurt and when they're upset. And so the answer is the same, right? Especially as we get older, it is normal. But distinguishing between cursing at a situation versus cursing at a person. So yeah, I think, again, that was it. One of the things that happens sometimes with our students is that they are kind of held to a higher behavioral standard than a neurotypical student, because they do everything overtly. They're not sneaky about things. They don't hide things. So if they're going to curse, they're going to do it overtly. Whereas a neurotypical kiddo who's the same age, say 17, may be cursing when they're by themselves, where nobody else can see or hear them, or in front of their friends who are also cursing, but not in front of adults. So I think sometimes we teach our kids that cursing isn't okay, We even have some of our students at Starfish that um, that have a belief that words like crap, um, stupid, shut up, that words like that are not okay. These are older students that if somebody says one of a word like that, they they think that that's not acceptable, which is common when you have kids who are little, right? That shut up, crap, stupid. Um, but when you get kids who are 16 and thinking that words like that are not okay for people to be using, it becomes difficult for them to navigate in social situations because those are pretty common words when we get to be teenagers, that most teenagers don't see those words as derogatory unless obviously they're being used as an insult. Um, and so, and then even with cursing, sometimes, we teach our kids that it's not okay to curse. But think about how common cursing is amongst teenagers. I mean, and even kids talk about it that they see it in their middle school, right? It definitely is present in high school. And so to teach our kids that things are not okay, again, because they have such black and white brains, it plants that in their brain, and then they have a really hard time being in middle school and high school environments with kids who are doing and saying those things. So the way that we approach it at Starfish, there's not really anything that we talk about as being right or wrong or good or bad or okay or not okay. There's no such thing in my mind. There are things that you choose to participate in and things that you choose to be around and things that you don't, and that those choices are different for all of us. Most of our Starfish students, almost all of them, do not like cursing. It's not something that most of our students have any desire to be around or participate in. But we do have some that do curse when they're around peers that curse, or maybe it's something, that their family does at home. It's not bad or good or right or wrong. We all get to make our own choices. The important part is recognizing the context, right? That we don't curse in front of teachers, probably don't curse in front of parents. We don't curse around kids who don't like that. So we have had kids in the past come to Starfish and curse, and the other kids don't like it. So it's just the conversation around context. And if you are a student who does not like cursing, choose to be around other kids who aren't cursing. If you are a student who doesn't care, then you can choose to be around whomever you want to. But I think sometimes in our efforts to help our kids maybe be more socially appropriate, we put up these boundaries and we call things good and bad and right and wrong and okay and not okay. And there's no such thing. We're imposing our own judgments and beliefs onto our kids, because there are families where cursing is totally fine. I can think of one right now, one of our Starfish families, where their students are older, they curse in their household. It's totally fine. So as parents and teachers, we tend to impart our own biases and judgments onto our kids, but everybody gets to make their own choice. They get to decide if they want to curse or not curse. And then Ramiro and I see our role as helping them interpret the context, right? So if a student comes and says something and curses, how did the other students respond to that? Right? Did they engage in it as well? Did they actually kind of avoid you? How did they engage in that? And the same at school. If you choose to curse at school, which again is pretty common as kids get older, where is it going to get you in trouble if you're cursing at school? Who are the people that you can probably choose to do that with, and who are the people that you don't want to do that around? So that's a conversation for so many different things, not even just cursing. That conversation applies to so many different things. But I think it's sometimes the things we pass along to our kids and our students when they're little stay with them forever, like that crap is a bad word, that shut up is a bad word. Because even in slang, shut up is slang, right? Stupid is slang. As a teenager, shut up it could mean like keep talking, right? Shut up, right? So it becomes slang. And the same with stupid. Stupid can actually be used to talk about something that's cool. So I think just being mindful of the boundaries that we are teaching our kids and realizing that our kids are very black and white thinkers and they are not always able to release those kinds of things as they get older. Like neurotypical kids can release those kinds of things. And a common example of this sometimes is some of our older kids that call their moms mommy, right? So it's a very preschool kind of vernacular, right? To call your mom mommy, your dad daddy. And neurotypical kids grow out of that and start calling, mom, dad, or whatever. Our kids tend to keep the same rules the whole time. So I've had, 16-year-olds come in, bye, mommy. Nothing wrong with that. But if we're talking about from a social perspective, that's probably going to be something that's going to affect their reputation, is being 16 years old and referring to their mom as mommy. Here at Starfish, once kids are 10, they can walk themselves in and out from the parking lot. And they do, right? They really like having that freedom. And so sometimes we'll get kids who are 14 and mom is walking in with them and sitting with them in the waiting room, but their mom is the only one doing that. So just keeping in mind how things change as our kids get older and making sure that we as teachers and parents are changing with them. When I was a public school teacher, once my kids, I had upper elementary, which in my district included 6th grade. And so once my kids got to about 4th grade, we no longer did frontal hugs. We did side hugs. Not because I don't absolutely love hugging my students, but because the age appropriateness changes, right? If you have a 5th grader going up and front hugging their teachers, it's not what the rest of the kids in their class are doing, most likely. And so we just change it to a side hug. And I would even recommend when kids get to about middle school that we're fist bumping, high fiving, that kind of thing, just because these social expectations change as we get older. And it's important that we are helping our kids change with that if we want them to have the best reputation possible. So there's just a lot of little things like that. The terms that we use for what we call things, saying to a kiddo, do you need to go potty when they're 12? Right. So just the terms that we use for things, the more flexible we can be with our kids, the more flexible they can be with other people. If we just have a black and white rule that saying stupid is bad, that's going to be something our kids struggle with for the rest of their lives, probably, because they have that planted in their brain. But if we can be flexible as our kids get older and grow, they can be able to be more flexible. My personal opinion is I'm not a big fan of using baby names for things because our kids tend to not grow out of those names. So, I talked about saying go potty, mommy and daddy, even the words that we make up for our body parts, right? We typically have certain words that we use when kids are little for body parts, or going to the bathroom, or just things like we're trying to make them more child friendly. But our kids don't ever get past that stage if that's what they're always used to referring to those things as. So my personal opinion is to just call things what they are. And, to talk about going to the bathroom like you would to another adult to talk about body parts by their actual names. And that way our kids don't have that awkward transitional phase where we're now asking them to call things something different because they're getting older. That's just my personal opinion, is to just, let's just call it what it is, instead of making up these 3-year-old, 2-year-old names for things like wee wee and tinkle and potty and, I don't know. Not a parent. But I think my perspective is what's the most beneficial for our kids. And in my opinion, it's requiring the least amount of shifts in their thinking as possible. It's just being upfront with things from the beginning, instead of saying something is one thing and then a few years later saying it's something else and expecting them to shift with that. So this actually, Ramiro, I feel like this is leading to a conversation that I wanted to have previously, and I don't remember that we did. And
Okay,
so I'm just gonna
go for it.
is
Yeah.
there, before I do that, is there anything you want to add about anything that we talked about so far, about the cursing, the vernacular, the shifting social expectations as kids get older?
Um, I mean, I agree with everything that you've said so far. I was trying to think of like how we started the conversation about cursing in that
Hmm.
last, and I'm pretty sure it started because we were talking about that student who has big reactions.
Mm,
And so the way he would react to like what people would say is like what got that conversation started. And I think the other student was like, oh, well, is it normal to curse like as a reaction, like to getting hurt or to like a situation? And then that's when that student who has big reactions had a big reaction about him talking about cursing. Because
ah,
I'm pretty sure, like, I know in the past, if someone did say a curse word, like if they were quoting a movie or like quoting a line from something and they said crap or whatever, he would have big reactions to that. And so speaking to, him probably growing up with, thinking that all those words are bad, no matter what, no matter when, no matter who is saying them, he got used to like reacting in that way. And so people his age, when they say those words, they think of him as being like the outsider for not accepting that kind of language. So yeah, I think just making sure that as like you were saying, as students get older, like them understanding like based on the context, it's okay to use words like that in a reaction or if you're upset or if you get hurt, like as long as it's not directed towards someone, it is a natural reaction to say a curse word, things like that. Because yeah, that student now stands out when he has big reactions due to other people his age who use those kinds of words.
yeah, that's a great point, that he's now the one who stands out because he doesn't use age appropriate vernacular, right? That's a great point, that because that student is a young adult now.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it definitely, I can remember a couple times where somebody, has said, like, just like you said, crap, or probably even damn, or something like that, and he definitely has a big reaction, but nobody else in the group cares, even
Mhm.
if they don't use the I remember probably a month ago, one of the students, I don't remember what she said, but it was something that I mentioned to her because there were younger kids in the room when she said it. If it would have just been her peer group, I wouldn't have cared at all,
Mhm.
because they are upper high school, slash young adult students. So I don't remember what exactly she said, but I just remember the only reason it caught my attention was because there were younger kids in the room.
Mhm.
Um, but to the rest of her peer group, nobody cared, right? um but that one student did, and so that's a great point that you made, that it makes him stand out because he's thinking something is socially inappropriate when he's the one that's,
Right. Mhm.
contextually speaking, is being socially inappropriate.
Yeah.
And it also brings us back to kids, judging the things that other kids say or do and the kind of reputation that gives them. So if our kid is the one who, thinks cursing is bad, and shut up and stupid are bad, as they get older, they get a reputation that, you know, isn't the greatest, because other kids know they can't have casual conversations around this kid or with this kid, because they don't, words that are common for middle schoolers to use, this kid is offended by, right? So yeah, that's a really great point. That how much it makes him stand out, because he's still operating out of an elementary school social mentality, basically. And what I wanted to add to that, I know I've talked about this several times in the last several years, so this may not be new stories, but one thing that this ties into the concept of code switching. So code switching is basically having different sets of behaviors for different contexts. It applies to the way that I first heard it was actually when I was doing research and doing presentations on kids who were living in poverty. And the term applies to their behavior at home versus their behavior at school, and how they're very different. The way that they behave at home, there's very different social expectations than the way they're expected to behave at school. And so these kids have to go through a shift, and they have to learn two different sets of behavior, and then they have to adapt back and forth. The same can be said for people who are bilingual, right? That there's a way you speak, maybe the same, maybe at home versus at school. That, it's code switching, being able to go back and forth. So in the social context, we talk about how there should be a difference between how you behave amongst your friends versus how you behave at work, for example. Right. So that's another code switching. Even things like, one of the things, Ramiro, and I reinforce is that, hey, what's up, is totally common and totally fine for our students to engage with each other, but not really to engage with the two of us, because we are adults, we're an authority figure in this situation, even though we're not very authoritative. But we don't want our kiddos going to work and going up to their boss and saying, hey, what's up, right? So there's code switching just in the different contexts that we're in. Even another example, at Starfish, kids don't have to raise their hand. The only time we really do is if a lot of kids have something they want to say at once, and that way we can see who has something they want to say. Other than that, it's a free for all at Starfish. Kids can say, something whenever they feel like it. If they need to go to the bathroom, they just need to let us know, so we know why they're walking out of the room. Whereas at school, raising your hand, asking permission to go to the bathroom, those things are expected. So our kids tend to really struggle with code switching because of that black and white rule mentality that we have. And one of the ways that I see this show up is that some of the things that we do or promote at home or at school are not always socially appropriate when our kids are around peers. And so some examples, even in my personal life, I have an example from when I was a step parent, and my stepchild was an only child and an only child in the extended family, and was totally allowed to take food off of people's plates because he's the only child, right? And then I come into the picture and we're having dinner and he's taking food off of my plate. And yeah, no, Steph is not down with that behavior, because I'm imagining this child going somewhere with friends. And absolutely, I do not want that child taking food off of the plate of his friends, because that would not go over really well. But because that was the only environment he'd been in, he did not realize that was contextual. He did not realize that that's something you only do with family or grandma or whomever. So just a great example of context, right? That realizing that some things we do in our families, even things like shutting the bathroom door. We have kids who come to Starfish and don't shut the bathroom door, because at home, it's not an expectation, which is totally normal, right? But for our kids, my suggestion is that we treat things at home as much as possible as if our kids were somewhere else. Because if we don't, our kids don't always recognize the contextual differences. They're not always able to code switch. So they're going to go to Starfish, they're going to go to therapy, they're going to go to someone else's house and not shut the bathroom door. So even at home, I recommend implementing things that you may not care about at all, but they help your child understand how to behave in other settings. They give them the information, because it's not, at that point, they're not making a choice not to do it. They don't even have the information. They don't even know that in other places you're expected to shut the bathroom door. The same way sometimes I see little boys, going to school and using urinal and taking everything off, right? They haven't been taught how to use a urinal without taking everything off. Coming out of the bathroom to wash their hands with pants off, right? So just my suggestion, the more inflexible your kiddo is, the harder time they have with change, the more I would suggest having things at home the way they would be if your kid was somewhere else, because that's a lot of code switching for them to have to do. And it's difficult for them. It's rough to learn things like that. So some of the examples from students at Starfish, I remember several years ago, we had a student who, it was summertime, and he was transitioning from elementary to middle school. And I'm always interested in where our kids go to school, because I come from the school system. I know where the schools are. And often we have kids who go to the same school. They may not even know each other, but then we realize they're in the same school. So I really try to keep track of where everybody goes to school. And so I asked him, hey, I don't remember, what middle school are you going to in August? And he got this big grin on his face, and he looked at me and he said, Poop Middle School. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I think I said to him, that makes me not really want to talk to you anymore, because that's a really weird way to answer that question. And so I sent an email to his parents, and I just said, hey, I just want to let you know, my concern with this is that I'm his teacher, right? I'm not a peer. And so the way that he answered that question to me was definitely, shows me that he's struggling with code switching. And mom and dad were not together. And mom replied and said, yes, this is how he and his father talk all the time, which is totally fine, except child does not understand that it's not totally fine in other contexts. It's not totally fine when you're talking to a teacher, to another adult, etc. That's where the challenge is when our kids don't understand that that's not appropriate in other social contexts. Another situation, we have a student who she and her brother are very close, and their family has a very loving, nurturing environment, and they friendly tease each other a lot. She and her brother friendly tease each other about being overweight. And she came to Starfish, and there was a student here who was obese. And she started saying the same things to this student that she and her brother would say to each other. This was the first time they had met. And this student was very offended, I don't think is the right word, but hurt, upset by the things that our student was saying. In her mind, she was friendly teasing, just like she does with her brother. This is not her brother. This is not even somebody that she knows. So again, the code switching, a very different situation. Nicknames, vernacular, things that we joke about, just be mindful of, if your student were to say those things or engage in that manner when they're with peers, how would that fly, right? How would that come across? What kind of reputation would it give them? And it does mean that if you adopt that methodology, there may be some things that you stop doing with your kids because you realize that they wouldn't work out so well when they're with other kids. So it can be a bit restricting. But in my opinion, the priority is our kids' social development, our kids' ability to code switch as little as possible, honestly, and to just be able to be in different situations and to adapt. So um, that's that's my conversation about code switching, about the names that we give things, the things that we teach our kids that are appropriate and not appropriate, and how significantly those things change over time. And so sometimes we're having to go back and change our mind, so it would seem, about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, because clearly we don't want our 5-year-olds cursing, but when they're 15, that's kind of how it goes. And they can choose not to. Again, most of our kids choose not to, but that doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. Whereas a 5-year-old, they're going to get in trouble for that, right? um but I think it's important. The concept of bad and good and right and wrong is an important one, and I also think the concept of what's going to help our kids have the most social success, um as they grow. Okay, Ramiro, anything else you want to add to that conversation?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it all sounds good. It all makes sense. Because yeah, I feel like we all do it without realizing it. All the code switching. Um, but yeah, that's something that a lot of our students need, like the conscious awareness of, like in order for them to understand like the differences between contexts and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. um okay, so I think that wraps up the last of our lesson weeks. And then we had a bonus week before we went on spring break. And then we're in one right now. Because the way that our schedule works in the spring, we have longer sessions. And so since our modules are 8 weeks, we take the extra week and it's just extra game time for everybody. I've actually missed both of them, because of my adventures that I'm having over here. So Ramiro is with the kids the week before spring break, and he's with the kids this week for our bonus weeks. So I'm going to turn over to Ramiro just to kind of share some things that have been going on, some discussions, some insights, some awesomeness from our bonus weeks.
Yeah. Um, so I guess I'll start with like the more general one that has happened. The cool thing about game time is, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but this is where the students either, or we help facilitate things that they can incorporate into game time. And this one just happens naturally with starfish. The students over time, they get to know each other, they get to learn more about each other and things like that. They have conversations with each other, whether it's in class or during game time. And so um, for this, um, some of our students, are usually here for a lesson for an hour and then for game time, or vice versa. They're here for a game time for an hour and then a lesson. So over the course of 2 hours, they're doing different things. When they have 2 hours of game time, I noticed that like towards the end of the second hour, some of them might have like a difficult time making it to the end, if they're just playing the same games for 2 hours. And so I thought, what, we do have Legos that we usually save for summer camp. Um, but I thought it might be cool and fun to see like if the students would enjoy some Legos. And just from what we've talked about throughout our lessons throughout the school year, a lot of our students love Legos. So I brought them out, and we just have like a couple of bins that just have random Legos in them. And so the students, they all went crazy. They all loved it. They loved the idea of being able to play with Legos. And so um, for me to introduce this new activity to them, it was very, very easy for them to engage in the Legos while also engaging with each other, just because they were doing something that they don't necessarily need help with anyone else from. That did not stop the conversations from flowing at all, which I thought was super cool. Steph was talking about how if if adults are in a like new job, whether it's like or I guess like a group training type of thing, or if a group of adults are told to do a certain task, it's kind of awkward for them to have conversations with each other while they do that task. It's kind of awkward. They don't know much about each other, and so there's a conscious transition to be able to talk to someone while they complete a task. But here, since like I said, like our students have gotten to know each other over time, even though this is like an individual task to play with Legos, they naturally had conversations going back and forth the entire time, and they all absolutely loved it. Um, and so for the first week, and then for like I guess for this week so far, being able to introduce the Legos to the students, they've made it like a whole new bonding experience, like where um, they get to use their imaginations and they get to show off what they're creating with each other. And it's just been super cool being able to see them, just naturally engage with one another while they do their individual like little Lego sets or their little creations. Um, so yeah, that's that. Did you want to add anything, Steph, about that one?
Yeah, and you mentioned, we were talking before we started recording about how I think one of the things about our program is that kids stay for as long as they want to. So we have kids who've been with us for 5 years. So at any given day in our program, it's a mix of kids and their longevity in the program. There's
Mhm.
kids who've been there for years, there's kids who've been there for months, there's kids who are new. It's a mix. And that's what contributes to it being such a socially engaging environment. Because just like you said, we were talking about if you go to like an orientation session at a new job, or even if you're at a work conference or just something where you don't really know other people, you're not likely to try to engage with people, right? Like we tend to just stick to ourselves a little bit more, as opposed, maybe there's some surface level conversations that happen, but we don't know these people. Our kids know each other. They've been together for some of them years at this point. And so there's such a difference, I think, as opposed to pop-up social groups where they're like, hey, we're meeting for 8 weeks. But it's all kids who've never met each other before. And then, 2 months later, it's a whole new group of kids for 8 weeks. And 2 months later, it's a whole new group of kids for 8 weeks. Our program is, our kids stay for however long they want to. And so they build these relationships and these communities, and they know each other. Even kids who come on different days, maybe 2 years ago, they were in a group together. Right. And I remember, I think you have a story to share like along that too, right? Our kids
Yeah.
know each other, or in summer camp, they're together in summer camp, but then during the school year, they come on different days. Um, so it just creates such an amazing community here. Of sometimes I forget that certain kids know each other because they were in camp together, or because 3 years ago they both came on Thursdays, or whatever the case may be. But I definitely think that's a significant advantage in the way that our model works, is that new kids coming in just add to the mix. It's like a layer cake, right? The kids who've been here for 5 years, and then 4 years, and then 3 and 2, and then new kids just add to the mix. They just shake up the dynamic a little bit. But it also provides them with models of from all the kids who've been here for so long. So we don't ever start off with a bunch of new kids who have no idea how things work around here. The new kids are always sprinkled in with everybody else. And so if you have a situation like this where, it's just game time for 2 hours, it's not a bunch of kids awkwardly standing around. It's, 80% of kids who've been here for a while and already know what to do. And then if we have newer kids, they get to see how everybody else handles that situation. So yeah, I think Romero and I often comment about how sometimes we have to stop conversations so that we can start class, or because it's time to go home. So it's definitely, if you think about the typical concept of social skills for autistic and ADHD kids, we are not ever waiting for our kids to start talking. We're not ever like having to like use tactics and strategies to get our kids to engage and talk. They've built such connections with each other and they're so comfortable and familiar in our environment that sometimes we're actually having to get them to stop talking. But yeah, I think, humans are social creatures, and there's a lot of assumptions about autistic kids in particular that they prefer to not be social. Humans are social creatures, and especially when we come across people that we really bond with and we really relate to and connect with. And I think, we talked about this in the last episode. A lot of our kids have common, how did I say it last time? Shared experiences that they don't realize until somebody starts talking about it. So our kids are very open with their diagnoses as starfish. That's a common experience that they have. They're very open about how school may be going. Our older kids sometimes talk about boyfriends, girlfriends, and the struggles that they're having with that. They talk about struggles they have with their parents. We know a lot about you guys. But it creates those shared experiences with them that, that I've heard something before about how most of us experience a lot of the same things in life. But you just don't always recognize it unless people are talking about it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I guess, going up from this, there's two stories that that have happened over the last couple of weeks, that I think fit in really well with just the overall idea of, like the comfort level of our students being able to engage with each other over time, whether or not they've seen each other every single week or if they used to see each other. So yeah, for this first one, these two students have been here for several years. And over those several years, they have been in the same groups, or at least have attended on the same nights, like for game night. But they hadn't seen each other in, honestly, uh, it's either been a few months or almost like a whole school year since they've seen each other.
Yeah, probably summer, right? I would
Yeah,
last summer
yeah.
maybe.
hmm And so this one student has typically always been very social, I would say. Like saying hi to people and saying hi to parents and things like that. So, for this student, it was just another natural engagement for him. And this other student has been naturally more, I guess, like socially anxious, definitely quieter, and in the past um, has really had to work through being able to acknowledge what people say to him and to contribute to conversations, and to engage in general. But especially over this past school year, he's gotten so much better at doing that naturally, adding little comments, adding in like little questions, or reacting to what other people say based on the context and what we're talking about. So when a student, I guess, let me see. So when student A saw student A was like, "Oh, hey, it's been so long. It's nice to see you." I initially expected student B to not say anything at all, like not to acknowledge his comment, because like naturally I would have thought like, okay, he's a little bit nervous and he wouldn't want to engage. But when student A said, "Hey, it's been so long," student B was like, "Yeah," like he animatedly, or like he acknowledged the comment and he agreed, like, "Yeah, it has been so long." Like, oh, it was so cool. That little 2-second conversation, it wasn't even a conversation, that 2-second little
Interaction.
interaction. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. It meant so much, just knowing from where student B started a few years ago to where he is now. That was such a huge thing to witness and for him to be a part of, like just for him to simply acknowledge what someone else said to him. So that was super cool. That was so cool. um, as soon as that happened, I took out the notepad and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this just happened." Um,
We have to talk about this.
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I think that's another with our program, because we don't do the 8-week drop in, drop out, whatever, that we get to see these things, right? Because to be honest, for that student, it's been a long process to
Yeah.
get him where he's comfortable engaging with. It's been a long process. And it's not something that we see 8 weeks at a time. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's the other benefit of our kids being able to be here for as long as they choose to is that we get to see sometimes things that are years in the making,
Hmm.
that in an 8-week program or a summer program or whatever, it's not always as obvious. And for some of our kids don't show market improvement in 8 weeks. Some of them do, some of them don't. And so to just be able to give our kids the runway that they need, it could be 3 years. I mean, we can't ever predict how quickly somebody's going to progress and be more socially confident and more comfortable and form relationships. We have no ability to predict that. Um, but it's really cool that so many of our families keep their kids in our program for so long and give them the time that they need to show that progression, right? We sometimes we have families that come back after week 1 and are like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you what happened, so sometimes things do happen quickly, but sometimes they happen super slow. It's just cool that we get to witness that.
Hmm. Absolutely. This this last story, um, related to like the overall idea of like socializing with other students. We've talked about this particular student a good amount in the past, or like in the last module. He also tends to be like socially anxious. Um, he um, he has trouble initiating things like during game time. We know he wants to play a certain game, but it's hard for him to like choose that game and ask other people to play with him. So with him, it's definitely been a lot of like encouragement and a lot of noticing comments saying like, "Oh, I feel like so and so would want to play this game, but we got to, someone's got to choose the game, or someone's got to pick what to do. Otherwise, we might just awkwardly stand here for a few minutes." So
Romero, can I interrupt you? I
yeah,
actually don't even know where you're going with this, but
okay.
I know who you're talking about just because of the context. So I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, but we I think it was the last week or two that I was there, I put him in charge of game time. And so that was our strat. We were like, God, he's not picking up on, like, we're not moving
Yeah.
forward, right? He's not becoming more confident. So I just walked into game time that I think it was the last week that I was there. And I said, okay, everybody, so and so's in charge of game time today. And the kids were like, what does that mean? And I said, oh, it just means that he gets to decide what we're doing today. And so I turned and looked at him and said, okay, what are we doing today? And then things naturally played out, right? But
Mhm.
that was our way. Romero and I were like, what can we do to push this along a little bit more, right? Because he's a very observant kid, he's a very intelligent kid, but we just couldn't get him over that cliff of initiating with the other kids. So I just put him in charge. And I just said, okay, you get to decide what we're doing today. And then he did, right? He went, and it's always the same game. But he did. He said, okay, we're gonna play this game. And I said, all right, who wants to play this game? And of course, we had more kids wanting to play than could even play the game. But I think it was, it had been something Ramiro and I had been talking about for weeks, and it just wasn't moving. And so finally I was like, you're in charge.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly. It was awesome. Yeah, and so that student is now in a different group on a different night of the week with different students. And it blows my mind because I did not think about this until like 10 minutes ago when I was thinking about like telling the story. He's with new students who he has overall have not met. He has not met yet. He might know like one or two from game night from the past. Um, but let's see, I think there were 6 of them total. Out of the 5 other students, I think he knew 2 of them. Um,
Okay. So just to clarify, every time we start a new module, our kids can change their schedule. So we sometimes have kids that choose a different day or a different time or whatever. So yeah, just to clarify that that's why he's in a different group, is our parents choose their schedule here based on what we have available. And so
mhm,
his mom picked a different day for him.
mhm. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. The other 5 students in that group tend to um, talk a lot with each other. They don't really like to play games or like structured games during game time. They just love to socialize. Natural conversations that are just flowing because they hang out outside of Starfish, or like they text. or just in general, they've known each other through Starfish and beyond, like for multiple years. So this game time was definitely more social based than game based, and so three of the students branched off and did their own little like group of conversation, like they were going back and forth, and two students who wanted to play a game, um, they ended up playing um, was it? Oh, I think Connect Four. So it was a two-person game, and so this student, who where this story is based around, he he was kind of stuck because um, he didn't necessarily want to just talk, but he also wasn't able to play that two-person game. And so what he ended up doing was he ended up sitting next to the two-person game, and he was just hanging out. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like at least he wants to be a part of the group. And
Mhm.
so I was hoping that after a little bit that the other two students would realize that he wants to do something with them. Um, but I also wanted this main student to be able to vocalize like that he wants to play a game or that he wants to join a group or wants to join a conversation or something. And so for about it was a little over 10 minutes. The two students that were playing the game with each other, they were just going back and forth with a conversation. Um, and one of the students was talking about her day at school and how I don't know how this came up, but like she was talking about how she's not allowed to eat candy anymore before her first hour of school. And so me hearing that, I was like, "What? You ate candy like before school even started?" And she's like, "Yeah, but it got me too wired, and so I can't do that anymore." And the main student who we're talking about, he like mumbled something, um, and so I caught it, but the other two students didn't hear him. And so I was like, "Oh, wait, what did you say?" And he said, "Oh, nothing. I didn't say anything." But the girl in the group, she looked at me like she was expecting something else to happen. And so I said, "Oh, I think so and so has a question for you." And so the girl asked him, "Oh, like what is it?" And he ended up asking, "What kind of candy do you like?" So related to the conversation, trying to find a way to get into the conversation naturally without stopping the conversation, he thought of the question, "What kind of candy do you like to eat?" based on what she was saying. So I thought that was so cool. And that that question led to her asking him what candy he likes. The other student jumped in talking about the candy that he likes. And then from there, they started talking about their favorite snacks, their favorite fast food, their favorite restaurants, their favorite desserts, their favorite movies. It started an entire conversation that lasted the rest of the hour just by him initiating or just by him wanting to join the conversation and being able to vocalize it. It was so cool. I don't know if I'm explaining this well at all. I'm
No,
just like all over
absolutely.
my but
That's
it was
amazing. It turned into a conversation snowball. That's amazing.
yeah.
Um, I I think, and we just finished our module about conversations. So this student is newer in our program. So that was his first time going through all that information about how to join a conversation, how to maintain a conversation. That's so cool because it shows that he's using what he learned, right? He's using the
Yeah.
strategies, listening to what the conversation's about, adding something that's related to the conversation. That's super cool. But you can see the anxiety, right? That he said something, but he said it quietly
Mhm.
to where people didn't hear him, right? That's a sign of social anxiety that it's almost like he gives himself an out,
Mm,
right? Like it's not that they didn't accept me into the conversation, it's that they didn't hear me,
mhm.
right? So he's almost giving himself an out. um but oh, that's such a cool conversation. And yeah, if I'm thinking about, he probably didn't know either one of those kids that were
Correct.
playing Connect. I'm thinking about who they were.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's in a on a different day in a different group,
Mhm.
sitting around two kids that he has never met before. And these
Mhm.
are older students, these are high school. um that's amazing, that's so cool. um can you imagine like how that kid felt when he went home that day? Do you know what
Exactly.
I mean? Like that's what I keep seeing is him like walking out to the car and seeing his mom, and just can you imagine the feeling that that kid left with?
Yeah.
Because he knew he was coming on a different day. He knew he was coming in to kids that he may or may not know. And so I'm sure there was some anxiety
Mhm.
just even coming on that day, just like we all have when we go into a new situation.
Mhm.
So, but that's also, that's so cool that no matter what day kids, because sometimes we have kids, if they miss a day, if they know that they're going to be out, they can come on a different day. And it's the same thing, right? It may be kids they don't know, but the environment is still exactly the same. Ramiro and I are still there. It's still Starfish Social Club. The kids are, it's different faces and different names, but the environment at Starfish Social Club is the same every day.
Mhm.
And so it's the kids take such good care of each other, and they are very loving and accepting and communal. Um, yeah, that's super cool. Cause the two kids playing Connect Four, um, if they're who I think they were, they always play together,
Yep.
right? And they're very connected to each other. They get along really well. So having a third person come in, um, I think that says a lot about them as well,
Mhm.
because the two of them they're totally fine doing their own thing. So yeah, that's super cool. Thank you for sharing that story, because that makes me really happy for him. He's still in his first year, so yeah, that's really cool. I'm really happy to hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, our kids want to be social, right? I
Mhm.
mean, he didn't want to just sit around for an hour not talking to anybody. He wanted to engage in the conversation. And once that doorway was opened, there
Mhm.
you go.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah, they found a lot of things that they had in common based on that conversation. They absolutely loved it. It was so cool because even if he does like engage or like make a comment or ask a question, I noticed that it's still kind of hard for him to like continue the conversation or like, feel comfortable to continue talking. But he did the entire time. It was just a constant back and forth conversation. It was super cool. It honestly made the hour fly by just because I was engaged in that conversation as well. And so yeah, it was just super cool to see him break out of that shell, and I'm hoping that he realizes that because of that, like it will hopefully get easier and easier as we continue on. Um,
Yeah.
and especially since now those students are all going to be in the same lesson and game time group, um, it'll help him build the confidence that he needs to be able to continue having conversations like that, or initiating conversations, or choosing a game during game time for the rest of the group or for a couple other students. Yeah, it's just super cool.
Yeah. And you know what I'm just now remembering while we're talking about is when this student's mom talked about changing his schedule, I remember that she said that she was a little concerned because he had made friends on the day that he was coming, and she was a little bit concerned about kind of that going away. And it was interesting when she said that, because I didn't even know what other kids she was talking about. I have not noticed him having any kind of particular affinity for anyone in particular in that group. And so I remember being curious, I wonder who he's referring to when he says that, because I hadn't noticed him gravitating toward anybody or anything like that. But that was one of his mom's concerns, is he's made some connections, and I'm a little apprehensive to change his schedule. And then there you go, day one, that's the
Mm,
outcome of day one. So um I typically do not recommend schedules for kids based on who the other kids are on those days, because we see that kids just get along with who's there. That sometimes there are kids where we think, oh, these two kids have this in common, or these two kids both really like this, or whatever. But we find that kids just get along with whomever. We have a student who started maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and had requested to be in a group with other girls. And so, because we have maybe 20-25% girls in our program. And so I specifically told her mom, these are the days that we have, more girls. And so we did arrange her schedule around that. She hasn't played with another girl since she started.
very true.
She very quickly connected with a boy in the group, and the two of them have become like pretty inseparable. And then there was a day that she came, we had a weird day because we had weather cancellations, and she came on our makeup day and didn't know any of the other kids that were there and was totally fine. So I don't usually recommend certain days or certain groups for kids because it always works out. No matter what day they come, no matter who's in the group, they will find somebody or somebody's that they are comfortable getting along with and engaging with. So we usually just do schedules based on parents, logistical preferences, like what days of the week work best for them, or if they want 2 days, 2 hours in a row versus an hour on two separate days, whatever. But yeah, we typically don't group kids based on who the other kids are because we found that it just really doesn't matter. So, okay. Thank you, Ramiro, for taking over for the last couple weeks. And when we come back, we'll have some new students. We have some kids who've changed schedules. We're starting a new module. So always lots of stuff to talk about when that happens, just because it shifts the dynamic a little bit in all of our groups, which is a really cool thing. It lets all of our kids have, exposure to different kids. It creates new relationships and new experiences and new dynamics, and that's cool. Every time we start a new module, it's super fun to see how things play out. So, all right, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.